G'day painters. Today I'm trying out the Skaven starter set from Games Workshop to see how good a result I can get with it. Let's try it out. There are a few things I'm using that don't come in the set that you'll need to for the painting and building. The first thing is a cup for water to wash your brushes, then a napkin or some paper towel for drying them. You could do without the clippers and just use a hobby knife, but the clippers make cutting the parts off the sprue so much easier. Then obviously some glue to put the models together. As a palette I'm using a tile. You can get these for like 10 cents from your local hardware store. Finally, it's a primer. I know some people do these videos without a primer, but you're doing yourself a disservice and making it a million times harder for yourself if you try to paint without a primer. Get a primer, it's well worth it. Let's get to opening the box. The first thing is the brush. It's nowhere near the quality of the brushes I normally use, but it's still a decent brush. And miles better than the brushes that were available when I first started painting. Then of course we have the models. I'll only be building and painting one for this video, I have plans for the others. The paints we have to work with are Khorne Red, Rakarth Flesh, Steel Legion Drab and Leadbelcher. Then we have Agrax Earthshade for a wash and Astro Granite Technical Paint for the basing. There are a lot of videos out there on how to build models, and this is a painting video, so I'm not going to spend much time on that part. But these guys are nice and easy to build, so you should have no problems. Time for what you're actually here for, the painting. I'm taking the paint out of the pot and putting it on my palette so I can water it down and have more control over it. Really anything would work for a palette, you could even use the plastics from the box if you wanted. My first step is blocking in all the skin with Rakarth Flesh. Remember, it's better to do a couple of thin layers rather than painting too thick. With practice, you'll find a nice balance where you can do most colours in 1 or 2 layers and get a good result. Then with Khorne Red I block in all the cloth. There is a lot of cloth on this model, so this is going to end up being the dominant colour, so take your time and get a nice smooth finish while blocking all this in. With Steel Legion Drab I do all the leather and wood parts, his pouches, belt, the straps on his head, the handle of his weapon and his shield. There are a lot of spots you want to do this colour, so make sure you work around the model and just double check that you've picked them all out. Next it's all the metal parts with Leadbelcher. This is his chainmail, weapon blade, armour, the spikes on his head, the filigree and bracing on his shield, and any buckles on his belt and pouches. Some of these details are pretty small and are hard to pick out with this brush. Make sure you're twisting the brush on your palette to get a nice tip on your brush, then brace your hands to avoid shaking, and just position the model in a way it's comfortable for you to approach the detail with your brush. Remember, there's no rush to get it finished. Take your time and be careful, and it'll save you some time having to go back and forth touching things up. Once our base coats are done, it's time for a wash. With Agrax Earthshade I do an all over wash to build up some shadows. Since this is a beginner video, it's probably worth mentioning that between this step and the previous step I changed out my water. When you're using metallic paints and washing your brush, it'll leave behind metallic flakes in the water, so you want to swap out your water before moving back to a normal paint, otherwise you can end up with those flakes on non-metallic parts of your model. If you're enjoying this video, I'll be doing some videos for both the Skaven and Stormcast where I add some more paints and see what sort of result I can get with more paints to play with. If you want to see what sort of results we can get when we add a few more paints, then hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on those videos. You want to give the wash plenty of time to dry, 30 minutes should be enough. Once it's dry, it's time to start some highlights. I start with Rakarth Flesh and pick out the raised parts and the parts facing upwards. Anywhere that'll get picked out by the light. I know highlighting can be intimidating, but as you can see here where I'm doing the tail, it's actually pretty simple and has a big impact on your finished model. So if you don't normally do highlighting, why not challenge yourself and give it a shot? Then it's the same thing with Corn Red. Continue to pick out the raised parts and the parts facing upwards that the light would be hitting. Make sure you're avoiding the shadows that the wash has established for us. Once you're done, you'll effectively have 3 sections: the shadow parts from where the wash has settled in the deeper parts, the mid-tone, which is the red parts that have been darkened a bit by the wash, then the highlights, which is just the pure Corn Red on the highlighted parts. It gives your model some depth and character. It's the exact same thing with Steel Legion Drab, building up some nice highlights and giving the brown parts some definition. This might come as a surprise, but then we do the exact same thing with Leadbelcher too. What a plot twist. Bet none of you saw that coming. Base time. I spread the Astro Granite technical paint over the base pretty thickly. When you start building up your brush collection, I'd recommend keeping an old brush for this sort of thing. You don't want to use your good brushes for it if you can avoid it. I put the model onto the base while the technical paint is still wet so it sits properly. I then also paint the rock with the Astro Granite so it matches the rest of the base. Then it's a heavy wash with Agrax Earthshade. You want to make sure the Astro Granite has dried properly before doing this, otherwise it'll mix up and it'll be a horrible effect. And finally, to finish off the model, we paint the rim of the base. Normally I do base rims black, but since we don't have any black to play with, I'm going with red. And he's finished. Just over an hour for him is pretty nice. Quick and easy and a good result with very few paints. If you found this video helpful and want to see how I improve on this when I add a few more paints, you should hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out when those videos come out. And if you're watching to this point, surely you've enjoyed the video, so hit that like button. Thanks for watching, catch you in the next video.